Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about housing your goat and fencing in your goat and things like that. And it would be remiss of me not to mention things that can poison your goat. When you are building your goat's pen, you want to make sure certain plants are not in the area. Now, obviously, the plants that grow in your region will not be the same as the plants that grow in my region. So I'm going to mention several of the most common dangerous plants for your goats, the plants you absolutely should not feed your goat and should not let them near. But you're going to want to double check the plants in your region, because this is not going to be an exhaustive list, simply because I can't go over every plant in the world and which plants are toxic and which aren't. So I'll just go through the ones I am very familiar with and some of the other ones that are really common in other areas, but I'm not going to do an extensive list. And before we talk about the plants themselves, I want to talk about some of the symptoms of poisoning when it comes to goats, because if you don't notice the symptoms, you can't fix it. So you want to watch for things like dilated pupils, excessive teeth grinding, possibly vomiting, labored breathing, if your goat is crying in pain, if he either has a racing heart or if his pulse seems kind of weak, if your goat is bloated, maybe they have scours, which is the goat version of diarrhea. Maybe they are really weak in their muscles, or maybe they're trembling a little bit. They might stagger around, or they might be like super excited, like more excited than is normal, what's called hyperexcitability. You might want to watch for that. Also, convulsions. If you notice signs of plant poisoning, you definitely want to remove your goat's feed, make the goat as comfortable as possible, give it lots of clean drinking water, don't put anything in the water, call your vet. Okay? Poisoning is not something to muck around with. You don't want to try to manage it on your own, especially if you're not sure what they ingested. So please immediately call your vet if you suspect your goat has consumed something that is poisonous. So that said, let's talk about a few of the most common plants that goats have a problem with when they eat them. And remember, goats eat everything. And yes, they will eat plants that are poisonous to them. Some goats don't. Some goats will avoid things like your amaryllis, and they won't touch them because they know it's poisonous, or they kind of instinctively figure it out. Other goats will eat it anyway. So it's just best to avoid these plants altogether. So I already mentioned amaryllis. It is toxic in its entirety. The entire plant, right from the tip of the leaves all the way down to the roots. Amaryllis is highly toxic to goats. Keep them away from it. Apricot trees technically are toxic, but it's really only the wilted leaves. So when those leaves start falling off your apricot trees in the fall, that can present a problem. So I'm not saying don't have apricot trees on your property, just have them well away from your goat pen. Avocado, the leaves and the fruit are highly toxic, so don't grow avocado near your goats because, like a lot of animals, they can't have it. So keep that away. Azaleas, pretty plant, highly toxic. The entirety of the plant is toxic. That goes as well for things like baneberry, bitterweed, black henbane. All three of those are toxic head to toe. You might want to watch out for black snake root. If I recall, black snake root is toxic entirely from, again, tip of the leaves right down through the roots. Same with black walnut is another bad one. Bleeding heart, one of my favorite plants. Unfortunately, it is toxic in its entirety to your goat. So no bleeding heart near your goat. Bloodroot, buckeye, buttercup. Buttercups are highly toxic. Again, the entire plant is toxic. Calla lilies are another one. Calla lilies are toxic to a lot of animals, such as your cats and stuff. So if you have a lot of animals, you probably don't have calla lilies planted in your yard. But calla lilies, not good for goats. Keep them away from it. Cherry trees. All variety of cherry trees, it's the wilted leaves. If they're chewing on the bark, that's not really that big a deal. Not great for the tree, but not that big a deal. It's those wilted leaves you want to make sure they don't eat. Crocus is another one, toxic in its entirety. Same with crow poison. There's a reason they call it crow poison. Don't let your goats eat it. Daffodils are also really, really toxic, the entire plant. So don't let them get into your daffodils. Dogbane and elephant's ear. Elephant's ear is a gorgeous plant, also highly toxic, so keep that one away. English laurel and English ivy both are not at all good for your goat. And you also want to keep them away from flax. Okay, flax is toxic for goats, so don't let, if you grow flax, that's fine, but don't let your goats eat it. Okay, if you're growing flax, you probably are growing it as a crop, so you probably don't want your goats eating it anyway, but it is toxic. Other ones to watch out for: foxglove, horse nettle, horsetail, and one of my favorite plants, the hydrangea. I love hydrangeas, so many of us do. Don't let your goats eat your hydrangeas. Okay, the entire plant is toxic. It's not as toxic as some, but it's still not good to let your goats eat it. So keep them away from your hydrangeas. Also, irises. My mom loves irises. We don't grow them here on the property simply because we don't want the animals getting into them and getting sick. Larkspur as well. Lily of the Valley, another one. It grows wild where we are, so Lily of the Valley is pretty toxic for goats. So whenever someone's getting goats, I always remind them, double check your property for Lily of the Valley. It grows rampant where we are. It does not grow rampant where everyone is. So if you do live in an area where it just kind of grows wild, double check your pens. Make sure you're not setting up your pens where there is Lily of the Valley. It is toxic. You also might want to watch out for milkweed. But milkweed, it's only the leaves that are toxic. Almost irrelevant though, because frankly, they're going to eat the leaves of all the plants that they're chomping on. So, yep, definitely avoid milkweed if you can, or at least fence it off. Mistletoe is well known to be toxic to a lot of animals, the entire plant, so avoid that one. Narcissus is not a good plant to have around goats. And nightshade, frankly, nightshade shouldn't be around most animals. It's not good. Oleander is another one. Pretty plant, not good for your goats. Peach trees and plum trees, again, same problem as you have with your apricot and your cherry trees. Those wilted leaves are not great for your goats, so you want to make sure those trees are planted well away from your goat pasture. You just want to make sure. Poison hemlock, here's the reason it's called poison hemlock. Don't let your animals near poison hemlock at all. One that comes as a surprise to some people is potato. Now, your goat can eat potato skins, no problem, that's not that big a deal, but they can't have the leaves or the stems of the potato plant. And you probably don't want your goats in your potatoes anyway, so keep the goat out of the potatoes. If they eat some of your cooked potato skins, it's not a big deal, but you do want to keep them away from the plant itself. Red maple, the leaves are toxic, so if you have red maple in your yard, don't let your goat eat those leaves, it's not good for them. Rhubarb, the leaves. Pretty much everybody knows by now that rhubarb leaves are toxic anyway, but goats are little stinkers. They will try to get into your rhubarb and they will try to eat the leaves, and then they'll end up very, very ill and you'll have to call the vet. So don't let them eat your rhubarb leaves. Not good. Tomatoes. They can eat a tomato. What they can't have are the leaves and stems of the tomato plant. So most goats don't really like tomatoes anyway, but they might like the plant, so keep them out of your tomatoes. Most of us want to keep them out of our tomatoes anyway, because we really would like to grow our tomatoes and eat them ourselves. So just keep them out of your garden, or try to keep your goats out of your garden. It can be a little bit of a tall order, but keep them out of your garden if you can. A couple more. Water hemlock is really bad for goats, so is white snakeroot. And unfortunately for me, wisteria. The seeds and pods of wisteria are highly toxic to goats, and I enjoy wisteria. I love the way it looks climbing on a fence. However, Arwen is a free-range goat, so because she's a free-range goat and wisteria is so highly toxic, at least the seeds and the pods, we are not going to grow it on our property just because it's not really that safe. So double check before you buy a bunch of plants to put in where your goats are, because you don't want to make them sick. And also remember that that is not an exhaustive list of things that can poison your goat. You want to make sure you double check and be very careful what you plant in your yard, because what grows in your area is going to be different than what grows in mine. So you might not have a problem with Lily of the Valley. You might have a problem with an entirely different plant. And just a final reminder, if you do end up needing to take your goat to the vet, make sure you are in contact with a vet that is familiar with goats. Waiting till you have an emergency and then calling around and hoping you get in touch with a vet who knows what they're doing, not the greatest way to approach this. So make sure you have a relationship with a vet prior to running into a problem. That way, if you do end up with a goat who consumes something they shouldn't, you are able to get in touch with your vet quickly, and you'll already trust the vet you have. That's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. We'll see you tomorrow.